Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 14th of August 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Well, 5G, Mike, is beginning to come into the public domain.
Yes, Ian Crane this morning was talking about Mark Steele and his apparent gagging by Gateshead Council. So if anybody wants to know more about that, get onto Ian's Facebook page or YouTube channel and have a look at what he had to report about that. So I thought I would have a look at what OFCOM was up to, because of course OFCOM is the regulator. They're supposed to be regulating this business, and they were tweeting this out yesterday. Is 5G more than a better mobile connection? Our tech experts take a look at the next generation of mobile technology and the benefits 5G could bring to healthcare, transport networks and beyond, and they provide a link.
That's a very positive message, isn't it?
We'll come on to just how positive that is as we work through this. But here is the page that they're talking about. They've got a useful page. What is 5G? What difference is 5G expected to make? And they've got a nice little infographic which shows us that it's going to provide more data, improved consumer experience, more connected devices, faster connection speeds, virtual and augmented reality. This is fantastic stuff. And it's going to allow more devices to be connected. Internet of Things, of course. E-health. Apparently, it's going to help our health a lot, because it's going to allow all the cancers that are created by the transmitters. It's going to allow those to be tracked better, and so on. Transport and logistics, environmental monitoring, smart energy networks, smart agriculture, smart retail, smart everything. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. And as we move on, instant response, so vehicle to everything communications, drone delivery, remote control, and smart manufacturing. This is what they're talking about. So you're absolutely right, Brian. This is a very positive message that's being put across by OFCOM. And it did occur to me that perhaps this isn't really appropriate, because what are we looking at here? Is this the regulator for this business, or is this an advertising campaign for the industry? I'm not entirely sure. So I thought I would have a look at some of the people that are involved in Ofcom, and let's have a look at their chairman first. Here he is, Lord Burns. What does he have to say about himself? Terry Burns apparently is a special advisor to Banco Santander SA. He's a former chief economic advisor and permanent secretary to HM Treasury, chairman of Santander UK PLC, Channel 4 Television, Marks and Spencer PLC, Welsh Water, and an independent advisor to the Secretary of State on the BBC Charter Review. So that's that use of the word independent again.
Yeah, this is one of these incredible people that seem to be able to do 50 times the work that a normal individual could do.
Well, in fairness, I don't think those are concurrent positions. Those are former positions. But I was interested that he is special advisor to Banco Santander. Because if we don't have to look too far before we discover that Banco Santander is right into the 5G business. So here is Nokia saying Nokia sets deadline for 5G launch in Europe at Santander Telecom Summit. So they're running this annual telecom summit. They're absolutely into this business. So you've got to ask the question, is there a conflict of interest here that the chairman of Ofcom is also working for Santander? Santander has an interest in this industry. Definitely seems like there's a conflict of interest there to me. But anyway, let's look at the chief executive, Sharon White of Ofcom, and what they say about her. Before joining Ofcom, Sharon had a long career in the civil service. She was second permanent secretary to the Treasury. Before that, she held board-level positions at the Ministry of Justice and the Department for International Development. She's worked as a civil service advisor at the Prime Minister's Policy Unit and in Washington, D.C. as a senior economist at the World Bank. So here we've got a globalist working in the civil service, career civil servant once she came into the British civil service. But policy unit, so helping set policy. Very tight connection here with the government.
I always have to ask this question. This lady is presumably American.
No, well, I don't know.
Is she?
I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think so, no. I think she's British.
She's British, just goes to Washington, D.C. as an economist at the World Bank.
Oxford and Cambridge education, goes off to the World Bank, comes back and becomes a career civil servant, but at top levels. So with keeping those two descriptions in mind, let's have a look at what Ofcom say their remit is. They say Ofcom is the communications regulator in the UK. We make sure that people in the UK get the best from the communications services and are protected from scams and sharp practices. The Communications Act says that Ofcom's principal duty is to further the interests of citizens and consumers. So that's really key. Ofcom's primary principal duty is to further the interests of citizens and consumers. It's not to further the interests of industry groups. It's not to further the interests of government. It's to further the interests of citizens, where appropriate by promoting competition. Meeting this duty is the heart of everything that Ofcom does, right at the heart. So what does Ofcom say their role is in 5G? Ofcom shares the government's ambition that the UK become a world leader in 5G. We're working with the government and industry to make this happen, including releasing the airwaves that companies will need to use for 5G products to work. We're also supporting companies who are looking to test and trial 5G services so we can help get innovative new services off the ground. There's nothing in this description of their role with regard to 5G which puts consumers, customers first. This is all about the industry and all about government. And so it's not surprising, therefore, that Ofcom's web pages about 5G read like and look like commercial messages for the industry. And I have to say, Brian, that there are quite a number of people beginning to ramp up campaigns on the risks and dangers of 5G. Some people have been talking about this for many years, but a lot of people getting interested in this. It seems to me that the position has changed, that government is now driving this technology forward. It's not coming from industry trying to be innovative. It's being driven by government first, and that I think is concerning. It's particularly concerning when the regulator, therefore, is not putting the interests of the population at the heart of everything they do as they claim that they should.
Perhaps this is the point, might say, to people who are really picking up and are concerned about 5G. Here is a very simple question to be put to Ofcom. How is it that Ofcom says it's independent, yet it's working to introduce this technology? And probably people should also be asking Ofcom what they've done. What have they done to actually look at a risk assessment on 5G and its health implications? So simple letters and emails into Ofcom could make a huge difference here, because what that immediately shows is that the public spotlight is on them instead of drifting through this very duplicitous agenda hidden in plain sight, really. So I think people could do a lot on this by just challenging Ofcom as to what they're up to. And of course, don't just write to Ofcom, write to the key individuals, because they're the people running the show. Well, we didn't plan this today, but it's fascinating how information comes in. Let's just jump back to the reports of cutting of trees in Sheffield. Now, many people believe quite strongly now that the tree cutting program to be carried out in UK cities is as a result of easing the path of 5G transmissions. Need more material on that, really, but we know certainly that leaves affect 5G transmission, and wet leaves almost block it completely.
Well, in fact, there was I can't remember which local council produced a video recently where they even suggested that something as small as a hanging basket would affect the 5G signal.
Yes. So trees going, and let's remember that it's a vast number of trees to be felled. 17,500 gone in Sheffield, and I think the total was about 35,000 trees or thereabouts, but people can check this themselves. Now, what we were interested alongside this, we reported on this a couple of weeks ago, was that while the tree felling operations were going on, because local people had got so emotive, Sheffield had sort of introduced an ID system so that people could get through their workers and presumably the police barriers in order to get into their own homes. And on it went with this report here: papers please, Sheffield Council to demand residents carry ID. Sheffield City Council willing to impose a bizarre police state simply in order to fell trees that don't need felling, against the wishes of residents and all expert advice, all in service to a 25-year contract with a private company. This is not what democracy is meant to look like. Well, this is not what democracy is meant to look like. And of course, we're not in a democracy. We're in something very different. We'll be coming on to that later. But this is the situation of UK in 2018. ID cards to get into your house because a local authority is going to cut down the trees that you don't want them to cut down. And on Sheffield City Council website, we had this post, access to properties during tree works. And it went on because they started to talk about hearings for the application for various injunction orders on people. So all interesting stuff, High Court orders made, and we just put up this tag, "We'll kill the trees and fine or imprison you if you don't like it." Well, remarkable that we were sent this just a couple of days ago, and it's a remarkable letter to a lady saying this: "Dear L, thank you for writing to me to raise these issues. I hope my reply will offer some reassurance. The council often has to close parts of the highway to complete essential work safely and efficiently, as all local authorities do regularly. During these closures, people have a right to access their properties, and highway workers will facilitate this for residents. It is not a requirement to produce ID, and we do not believe this has happened in practice. The notice was posted in error and has now been removed."
So the original notice saying that ID was required was apparently a mistake.
It was a terrible mistake, Mike. It was all a terrible mistake, and apparently that's been taken down. But you'll notice in the rest of the letter from Sheffield here, they're big up on the fact that the courts have said this, the courts have said that. Nothing to do with Sheffield City Council. It's the courts that have made the decision and ultimately imprisoned people who didn't want the trees cut down. So Councillor Lewis Dagnall here, Cabinet Member for Environment and Street Care, all a terrible mistake, and it's nothing to do with the council that, I don't like the word citizens, inhabitants of Sheffield have been imprisoned because they don't like having their trees cut down. That's those nasty courts. But really what we're seeing here is people power, that where people in Sheffield and elsewhere have stood up to be counted, where they have challenged these people with perfectly reasonable letters, all of a sudden you see them backtracking. So this is a great indication of what people can actually do. Now, on the subject of being active, a little bit more information on the funeral for Guy Taylor. These are the details. Monday the 2nd of August.
20th of August.
I beg your pardon. Monday the 20th of August 2018 at 1:30 p.m. Hereford Crematorium in Westphaling Street, Hereford, HR40JE. Flowers to go to the funeral directors. That's an S.A. Evans Funeral Directors, 23 to 24 Jail Street, Hereford, HR12HU. The reception will be at Hereford Rowing Club, 37 Grey Friars Avenue, Hereford, HR40BE. Now, dress, normal attire is fine, colour is fine if you prefer. And there's a little note to say that we believe that Guy was particularly keen on yellow and gold. So maybe that gives people a pointer, but this is certainly not a funeral in black. And there is perfectly adequate parking both at the crematorium and we understand at the rowing club. So supporters for Guy, very, very welcome. Of course, this is a funeral, due respect to be shown, but it does also provide an opportunity for Guy's friends and acquaintances to show respect for all of his good work. And as we said, a very good man who stood up to be counted.
Now, GSTV in the Netherlands has posted the first interview with EU whistleblower Roelie Post since she was separated from her job with the European Commission a couple of weeks ago. Now, Roelie Post, for those that don't know, was sent over to Romania, I believe it was 1999, following the fall of Ceausescu to look at what was going on with the orphanages over there. And she very quickly discovered things that she didn't like very much. She kept a diary on her work for the European Commission she was attempting to help with Romanian reform on child protection, but she found that children were being adopted internationally, and this adoption process was being used, well, it was turning into quite a money spinner for some people, and she whistleblew on it. Now, unfortunately, she has never been given whistleblowing status by the European Union or the European Commission. And in fact, one of the points she makes in this video is that there is no protection for whistleblowers within the EU or the European Commission, and that any sort of court cases, any employment court cases which may take place would be internal processes within the EU or the EC. And so this is a completely unfair process. She's actually in fear of her life at the moment and is in hiding. But as she says, and as you can see in the caption below there, however, walking away and stopping isn't an option. The case is also about, it's not just about her and the fact that she's lost her job and the way that she's being treated by the European Commission. It's also about children's rights, and so she cannot give up on this. Now, if you want to find out more about what it was that she discovered and what she's been talking about for quite some time, then please get her book. This will support her, of course, as well if you do that. It's available on the usual outlets. Romania for Export Only, the untold story of the Romanian orphans. And you know, one of the points that somebody that was commenting on this book was making was this, that especially after 1997, when a points system was introduced, the Romanian adoption market was booming. With this system, adoption agencies could earn points by investing in social services. When enough points would be gathered, the agencies would be given a child for international adoption. This became a business, and in fact, more recently, speaking to Roelie and her colleagues, it's pretty clear that involved in this is the organ trade and trafficking, human slavery,
and the drug industry.
So this is a huge thing that Roelie Post, as an employee of the European Commission, stumbled across in her work and then attempted to do something about, and as a result of trying to do something about it, has been absolutely victimized by the establishment, the system, ever since.
And that's the system in the EU, Mike. And of course, she did at one stage go to British politicians, members of Parliament, for help, and received absolutely no help in trying to protect those children. So the book is well worth reading, and the content says once again that where the abuse of children is concerned, we see a total cover-up, be it by Westminster or the European Union.
Now, moving on sort of towards censorship here, and really the response in the mainstream media to the coverage of news and so on that's appearing in social media and alternative media, and we see more and more hysterical responses to this, and this one must take the biscuit. This is Prospect, and their headline here is "The Politics of Unhappiness?" ? The surprising link between conspiracy theories and mental health. And they say from Pizzagate to 9/11, conspiracy theories are everywhere, and research shows they could be linked to things like stress or isolation. Now, the author of this article begins the article by pretending that they have a mental health issue themselves, but it is clearly pretense as the article goes on. They say if you suffered with a mental health illness for long enough, chances are that at some point you'll begin to recognize patterns to your health. When I'm well, he says, I'm enthusiastic about the world, I like myself. When I'm not, I want to know everything there is about chemtrails, the suspicious death of Kurt Cobain. I fear my extensive knowledge of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 would not be a hit at parties, even if I felt well enough to attend them. Over 20 plus years of zigzagging between relative happiness and obsessive Googling, why did the third tower collapse? I've come to wonder whether there's a link between the two states of mind. A recent study suggests this may be so. Early last year, the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology published a report that suggests such interests, as well as superstition, may well be caused by ostracization. So, and it goes on to conclude in this article, the term conspiracy theory is now so tainted by association that few who do believe in fringe theories would ever describe themselves thus. Indeed, they prefer the term truth seeker. We know conspiracy theorists, they're silly. They wear tinfoil hats in movies to protect them against alien death rays. But truth seekers, that's a hell of a rebrand. This is absolutely fascinating article. I think it says a lot about about what's going through the minds of mainstream media journalists at the moment. I think
they're struggling to catch up.
Well,
is what's going on, Mike. I'm sure of this.
But I would imagine there are many mainstream journalists who would agree with everything that's written in this article. But what are they attempting to do here? They're attempting to suggest that anybody that is asking legitimate questions about world events is mentally ill. That's where they're going to, and I believe that's why in the last 12 to 18 months we have seen so much interest and so much promotion of mental health issues by central government. This narrative that's being presented in this Prospect magazine, I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming weeks and months.
Full-blown dictatorship. If you do not agree with the government and its policies, you are mentally ill. This is simply what's coming in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yesterday, of course, we were focusing on censorship on social media and whatnot, and particularly on the right-wing end of the political spectrum. But we said yesterday that this doesn't just apply to right-wing websites and so on, and here's the evidence of it. RT reporting that Facebook has, as they described it, vanished. Venezuela-based left-wing leaning news network. This is Telesur English, which is a multi-state funded Latin American news network that's saying that Facebook has removed its page for the second time this year without any specific reason being provided. They say that the page was abruptly taken offline yesterday, and Facebook, they say, provided a vague explanation that the page had violated terms of use but didn't elaborate any further. They're saying this is an alarming development in light of recent shutting down of pages that don't fit the mainstream narrative. I have to say I agree, and I'm going to say it again. It doesn't matter whether we agree with the content that these websites are putting out, if we stand by and accept this type of outrageous censorship. I mean, it is outrageous because none of these people are breaking any laws. They may be, the social media channels are saying that they're breaking community rules or they're breaking the terms and conditions of the network. But remember, I'll say it again, this is not being driven by the social media networks themselves. This is being driven by central government, Britain, France, United States governments driving this. And so, this notion that people are in breach of community guidelines is just nonsense. Right. Quick reminder.
What's needed is a break.
It is a break, absolutely. So tomorrow will be our last UK column news in August, and we will be back on the 3rd of September as we take a couple of weeks break, a much needed break, I have to say.
And I'll say with a bit of cynicism that those 2 weeks will give our normal viewers and listeners the opportunity to get a feel of what it would be like if the UK column were to be shut down by the British government. So there's a lot to do in the coming weeks and months, not only by UK column, but everybody else there who is trying to keep free speech going in the United Kingdom. Right.
Now, yesterday, Brian, you were talking about the attack on young people's minds in the big society. Well, today we've had a reminder from the British government that they are setting up 1,000 young people to be trained as democracy ambassadors. They're particularly concerned about the lack of engagement in young people, so they've decided that 1,000 democracy ambassadors aged 13 to 16 are going to be recruited across the UK. The scheme is going to be launched to apparently inspire engagement in democracy from an earlier age. What was it Bertrand Russell said? Catch the patient young enough. Well, yes, that seems to be exactly what's going on here. Ambassadors will learn about the UK's democratic system and promote participation amongst their peers. So this was originally launched in July when the Minister for the Constitution, Chloe Smith, decided to unveil this during National Democracy Week, but they've added some more details about it now. So they were concerned at the time that only 39% of 18 to 24-year-olds and 35% of 25 to 34-year-olds claim to know at least a fair amount about what democracy is. And so they've decided that the best thing to do is to get people when they're 13. And well, they're going to educate them on how democracy works in England, both at a national and local level. They're going to equip them with the skills to share this knowledge further. And they're going to issue a challenge to reach out to 100 of their peers for each of these 1,000 and encourage participation in democracy. So, well, there you go. What can we say?
And do we know who's actually going to train them? Is that
going to be this NGO, Young Citizens, that is going to be organising this thing now. Who's actually going to run the various training courses? That's another question. I have not yet found.
So we could do with some research help into having a look at that Young Citizens. What immediately comes into my mind is the Young Foundation behind it, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, right now, look, we don't normally like petitions, and we particularly don't normally like petitions from change.org that are on change.org. But anyway, I thought this one was useful. The one potentially useful point of petitions, of course, is that they're a useful way of getting an idea out to lots of different people by through the promotion of the petition itself. But this one I thought was a useful one to demand that the BBC changes its rules to ensure that think tanks declare their main funders. And the petition says, in the interest of full political transparency and accountability, we call upon the BBC to introduce new financial transparency rules to ensure that think tanks which appear on BBC News and current affairs programmes disclose the main funders of the organisations. Failure to publicly declare this information should disqualify the organisation from appearing on a BBC platform. And I think that's absolutely right. If you go to this petition, you can see the graphic that they've got there, which show the relative transparency of various think tanks in terms of who's funding them. I mean, Adam Smith Institute, I think, is right at the very bottom there, who absolutely refuse under any circumstances to tell anybody about who is giving them the funding that they... so we have no idea which vested interests that they're working for.
Yeah.
Adam Smith constantly on the BBC as a so-called expert commentator.
And the other good thing about this is it draws people's attention to the sheer number of these organisations. Once you see them, you can become curious about what they really are and who's behind them, aside from the funding. Well, let's come back onto the subject of our society and how it's manipulated. Yesterday we were talking about this, the Social Integration Commission, and we were pointing out that they were saying that the proportion of British residents who are members of a minority ethnic group is projected to rise to 38% by 2050, an increase from 16% in mid-2012. So we've got immigration being pushed very, very strongly by this organisation. And we said, of course, this is a complete plan. This is nothing to do with helping humanity, looking after refugees. This is a cynical and very large globalist agenda. And we put this gentleman on screen, Peter Sutherland. He's now deceased, but former UN Special Representative for Migration. And he, of course, said the EU should be doing its best to encourage mass migration to undermine the homogeneity of European countries. So the cynical use of the misery of immigration to break down nation states. That was what we started to have a look at. And I'm just going to say, a sharp-eyed viewer spotted this advert. Now, this is from Plymouth. It's a planning application. What's it to do with mixed development, 600 dwellings, 8,600 square metres of Class A, A2, A3 classification development, hotels, multi-storey car park, etc. This is at Mill Bay. This is down by the docks in Plymouth. But what caught the person's eye was the English Cities Fund. And I was intrigued because I hadn't come across that one before. So we thought we'd just follow through and see where that took us. And here is the English Cities Fund. And in a little animation on their website, they say they're unlocking urban imagination. They're helping progress. They're doing all sorts of good works. But what is this about? Well, actually, we've got a number of organisations linked in with this. Essentially, we've got Homes England, which is the government's initiative itself. We've got big globalist Legal and General. They're boasting about having nearly £1 trillion available. but now they're into the business and making sure people can live comfortably in a nice little home. And we've got another one, Muse Developments, one of the country's leading names in mixed-use development. It's a national developer, regional operations in Manchester, London, Leeds and Glasgow. They are simply interested about making sure people have got warm, comfortable houses, Mike. Nothing to do with profits. They happen to be linked in with this organisation, part of Morgan Sinful Group plc, a leading UK construction and regeneration provider with a revenue of a mere circa £2.8 billion. And they're very interested in urban regeneration, housing construction, because I understand they make a bit of profit out of it, apparently, allegedly. Well, let's see what people have said. So we've got Sajid Javid here when this was launched. This government is determined to build the homes our country needs and help more people get on the housing ladder. Homes England will be at the heart of leading this effort. And it's to be a very big effort because, according to their own documentation, they're going to support the small and medium enterprise sector. And they're going to put a quick 750 million of the £1 billion short-term fund is going to be committed to those builders, custom builders and developers using modern methods of construction. And across the country, they've now roped in 310 local authorities. They've published a brownfield register. We don't know what public land has been sold off to developers, but we do have a register of brownfield sites. And apparently that's revealed over 26,000 hectares of development land on 16,000 sites. When you read through this stuff, Mike, clearly what you're seeing is there's going to be a massive building program. And it's very interesting that if we follow Mr. Sajid Javid through, the Sun here was asking him a few difficult questions about a legal loophole which was allowing nearly 60,000 non-EU workers a year to bypass the so-called migration gap.
Right, because this is what's driving this requirement for housing, isn't it? And but the key point here, Brian, is it not that they're focusing on the building of houses and they're ignoring all the other infrastructure that's required to go with those houses in order to build communities?
Yes, absolutely correct. So if you look at development plans, many years ago, I was able to work with a group that did this sort of analysis of what was called the Devon County Structure Plan. This is when the government suddenly unleashed a plan that there were to be, I think, roughly about 250,000 houses built in Devon. But if you looked at the documentation, there was just a very few paragraphs on the roads. There was almost nothing on where people were going to work, and there was almost nothing on the railway system and how that could help. So massive house building agenda. Why are these houses needed? Well, we know that a lot of this is because the government's policy is mass immigration, and that immigration is nothing about helping people, whatever their country of origin, whatever their colour. This is about the agenda to break down nation states. Now, this little story gets even more interesting. So if we come back to Homes England, here we've got Nick Walkley, the chief executive. And of course, this is hitting all of the sort of construction papers. We've got Inside Housing here. The government's new delivery agency will use its land assembly and risk sharing powers to support groups of housing associations to up development. So now we can see power given to these housing associations. We had council housing taken away from people, security of a lifelong house, a council house, taken away, people now made vulnerable to commercial interests, quasi-commercial interests in those housing associations, and those housing associations to get more power. But stay with us, because this gentleman said this: as Homes England, we will use our land, finance and expertise to expand the delivery of affordable new homes and connect ambitious partners to, quote, remove barriers to house building. So massive amounts of government money coming in. if there's a proposal to build in your community area, then you're not going to be able to challenge this because they're going to steamroller over local communities.
And of course, they've already set this precedent with regard to fracking, where they've moved the decision about planning applications for fracking, for example, out of the hands of the local authority into central government.
That's correct. And we know with 5G and telecommunications masts, they don't need the planning permission in the first place. So there we are, to remove barriers to house building. Anybody who dares challenge this government policy is a barrier, and they're going to steamroller over you.
Isn't that what
Julia Middleton said in Beyond Authority? Absolutely. But this is where it gets really interesting, because here's the boss, Ed Lister, chairman of Homes England. We will take the lead in delivering better quality homes and great places that set the bar high for others. We'll also stimulate demand for modern methods of construction and, quote, ultimately disrupt the housing market. Now, that's a very, very interesting statement. I thought, what does this man mean? Well, I think he means what he says. We're not going to have a housing market which is running on normal demand and supply, not about normal companies competing for the work. This is like a Stalinist 5-year program where they're just going to tell you what's coming. But of course, the language of disruption comes in particular from one man called Dominic Campbell. And I thought to myself, perhaps I should just have a look at Dominic and see if he's been talking about disruption. Well, when I went onto his Twitter page, I couldn't believe it. Let's expand his pinned tweet, because Dominic Campbell, the master of disruption and the government's e-programme, says, really looking forward to working with colleagues at Home England as the new interim chief digital officer. And there's an accolade for him that he's one of the most influential digital leaders in the public sector. Our shared vision will transform our corporate culture and position us as an exemplar of government delivery in the 21st century. So Homes England is sold to the public as an agency, but when they declare their own hand, they are fully corporate.
Yeah.
This is power, this is profit making. And this pernicious young man, Dominic Campbell, who boasted of disrupting all manner of government organisations, civil service organisations, to bring in change, is now embedded in the heart of it. And I'll just remind people that I picked him up a little while ago when he was saying, how do we disrupt organisations like local government? And I asked the question, what people are dying in a disrupted NHS? Yes. So very, very dangerous individuals. And now we can see that the government's future political agenda is absolutely that what the government says is policy. If you challenge it, you're mentally ill. Nobody will stand in the way of that policy. And it won't be the government or the public sector building the houses. It's going to be this opaque, corporatist, profit-making culture. Cartel is a good word for it, Mike. Well, we'll end there. Thank you very much for joining us today. Tomorrow will be the last UK column news before we take what we think is a well-earned break. Happy to say that. Look forward to having our audience with us tomorrow. And if you're watching or listening to UK Column and you're not yet a subscriber, please consider subscribing, because we can only do what we do with your financial help. And I'll end finally by saying thank you very much to the person who was very generous in a recent donation to the British Constitution Group Chartist movement. It's really wonderful to see people getting behind initiatives to actually tackle what's happening instead of sit watching. So thank you very much. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.